We are starting with excretory products and their elimination. Excretory products and their elimination. Now, there are two terminologies. One is excretion and another one is egestion, which is also called as defecation. It is also called as defecation. Now, what is excretion basically? Excretion is the removal of, it is basically the removal of nitrogenous waste material from our body. Removal of nitrogenous waste material from our body. Right? We have to give a special emphasis on the nitrogenous term here, because excretion means only the removal of nitrogenous waste material from our body. Now, what is egestion or defecation? It is the removal of undigested food product from our body. It is the removal of undigested food material from our body. Right? So the removal of nitrogenous waste material from our body is known as excretion, whereas the removal of undigested food material from our body is known as egestion. Correct? Am I clear? Now, excretion is a function of excretory system. Regarding this excretion, we have a special system in our body called as excretory system. Whereas egestion or defecation is a function of our digestive system. So these two terminologies are not same. These two terminologies are not same. Excretion and egestion, these two are completely different terminologies. Excretion means the removal of nitrogenous waste material, whereas egestion means the removal of the undigested food material. Now, how many types of excretory products do we produce basically? Not only humans, rather all animals. The excretory products, basically the nitrogenous waste materials, these are mainly categorized into three categories. These are mainly categorized into three categories. The first one is ammonia, second is urea, and the third one is your uric acid. One is ammonia, second one is urea, and the third one is known as uric acid. Now, if we arrange these three excretory products on the basis of toxicity, now the most toxic one is ammonia. After that, there is urea, and the third one is uric acid. So the most toxic one is ammonia. The least toxic one is uric acid. Right? So this becomes a very important question. Out of the three nitrogenous waste material, ammonia, urea, and uric acid, which one is the most toxic one? Uric acid is the least toxic one. Least toxic one, whereas urea is less toxic than ammonia but more toxic than uric acid. Okay, ammonia is maximally soluble in water. Ammonia is maximally soluble in water. So whenever ammonia gets excreted out from our body, it requires a lot of water to get excreted out, right? So ammonia requires a lot of water to be excreted. It requires a lot of water to be excreted. Those organisms that releases or that excretes ammonia as their waste material are known as ammonotelic organisms. Ammonotelic organisms. And the property of releasing ammonia from the body is known as ammonotelism. So ammonotelism is the property, and those organisms that releases ammonia is known as ammonotelic. And we have to remember one more important thing from here. Ammonia is, there is no role of kidney in excretion of ammonia. There is no role of kidney in excretion of ammonia, because as soon as ammonia is produced, it gets directly excreted out by diffusion. It directly gets excreted by diffusion. It directly gets excreted out by diffusion. Correct? As soon as ammonia is produced, it directly gets excreted out by the process of diffusion. So being a terrestrial organism, can we excrete ammonia? We can't, because we are terrestrial organism. We are living in terrestrial habitat. In a terrestrial habitat, the limiting factor is water. The limiting factor is water. But ammonia requires a lot of water to be excreted out. So being a terrestrial animal, if I try to excrete ammonia from my body, it will take a lot of water from my body. Correct? So and our body will get dehydrated very soon. Being a terrestrial organism, the biggest fear of us is dehydration. Correct? This is the biggest fear of us. So every time when ammonia gets excreted, it takes a lot of water from our body because it is maximally soluble in water. So being a terrestrial organism, we can't afford excreting ammonia because our body will soon get dehydrated. So ammonotelism is a property that is shown by generally aquatic organisms. So which organism shows ammonotelism? Aquatic organisms. Because in aquatic organisms, they are living in such a habitat where there is no need of, where there is no fear of being dehydrated. Correct? There is no fear of being dehydrated because they are living within the aquatic habitat. There is no scarcity of water. So that's why the aquatic organisms, they releases ammonia as their excretory products. Now, urea. What is actually urea? Urea is a nitrogenous waste material, comparatively less toxic than ammonia, but more toxic than uric acid. And urea is less soluble in water than ammonia. That means it takes comparatively less amount of water to be excreted out from our body than than ammonia. So the organisms those releases urea as their waste material are known as ureotelic organisms, and this property is known as ureotelism. We human beings, we actually release urea as our waste material. So in our body, ammonia is actually produced. And this ammonia gets converted into urea in liver. Where? In liver. And this cycle is known as urea cycle, also called as ornithine cycle. Also known as ornithine cycle, also called as Krebs-Hensley cycle. Also called as Krebs-Hensley cycle. Krebs-Hensley cycle. So we are actually ureotelic organism. We excrete urea, but in our body, ammonia is actually produced. Later on, this ammonia is converted into urea in the liver. So ornithine cycle, where it takes place? It takes place in the liver. Where it is taking place? It is taking place in the liver. Correct. Now, uric acid is the least toxic. We can say it is least soluble, or we can say it is insoluble in water. It is almost least soluble or insoluble in water. Those organisms that releases uric acid as their waste material are known as uricotelic organism, and this property is known as uricotelism. This property is known as uricotelism. Now, one thing we have to remember from this point, as uric acid is least soluble, that means those organisms releasing uric acid as a waste material, no water is excreted along with the waste material, correct? No water is released along with the excretory product. So the organism releasing uric acid as their waste material, they are releasing their excretory material in terms of a paste, or in terms of a pellet. It is known as pellet. Like uricotelism is seen in case of birds, And the excretory product in case of birds are known as guano. It is called as guano. Guano is the excretory product. It is released in the form of a paste or in the form of a pellet, because it is least soluble in water, and as it is least soluble, or we can say it is almost insoluble, so there is almost negligible amount of water is released with the uric acid. So what does NCERT say? What does NCERT say? If we go through the NCERT, what does NCERT say? NCERT says animals accumulate ammonia, urea, uric acid, carbon dioxide, water, and ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, phosphate, sulfate, etc., either by metabolic activity. So how does waste material are produced in our body? It is produced by metabolic reactions, or by other means like excess ingestion. If we take excess amount of food material due to our metabolic activity that are constantly been going on inside our cells, we actually produce waste material, right? These substances have to be removed either totally or partially. Why the word partially is written? Because not all waste materials are completely or fully released or fully excreted out. Some of the waste materials are still required for our body, and those are actually partially released. From our body. Now, in this chapter, you will learn the mechanism of elimination of these substances with special emphasis on common nitrogenous waste. We are actually emphasizing on nitrogenous waste material basically. Now, there are three major nitrogenous waste material: ammonia, urea, and uric acid. These three are the major forms of nitrogenous waste excreted by animals. Ammonia is the most toxic form, and it requires a large amount of water for its elimination. But is there any role of kidney in excreting ammonia? No, because as soon as ammonia is produced, it is directly being excreted out from our body. Whereas uric acid, being the least toxic, can be removed with a minimum loss of water. That's why I have said that it is released in the form of a paste or in the form of a pellet. And in case of birds, it is called as guano. Okay, now those organisms releasing ammonia are known as ammonotelic organisms, and this process is known as ammonotelism. Correct? So which organisms are ammonotelic? Those are living inside the water, like many bony fishes. Bony fishes belongs to the Osteichthyes category. Osteichthyes means bony fishes. Correct? Now, aquatic amphibians living in the water basically, and aquatic insects, right? Carefully noted down: aquatic insects, aquatic amphibians. Aquatic term is given, means they are living inside the water. So as ammonia, it is readily soluble, is generally excreted by diffusion. So kidneys do not play any significant role in its removal. This is the most important line from NCERT. There is no role of kidney in excreting ammonia. Whereas terrestrial adaptation, those organisms living in the land, terrestrial adaptation, it necessitated the production of lesser toxic nitrogenous waste like urea and uric acid for conservation of water. Because if we are also trying to release ammonia, it will take a large volume of water from our body to be excreted out. Now, mammals, many terrestrial amphibians, and marine fishes mainly excrete urea. So, ureotelic organisms. What are the examples? Mammals, terrestrial amphibians, and marine fishes. We all know that, like amphibians, they can live in both water as well as in land. So, amphibians, when they are actually present inside the water in the larval stage, they excrete ammonia as their waste material. But when they get converted into adult, they start releasing urea as their excretory product. And they are called as ureotelic organism. So ammonia produced by metabolism. Actually, via metabolism, our body produces ammonia. This ammonia is later converted into urea, where in the liver, and the name of the cycle is known as ornithine cycle, or also called as urea cycle, also called as Krebs-Hensley cycle, and in of these animals and released into the blood, which is then filtered and excreted out by the kidney. So is there any role in releasing urea from the body? Sorry, is there any role of kidney in releasing urea? Of course, the statement will be true. Yes, there is role of kidney in excreting urea from our body. Some amount of urea, like we have to remember here, some amount of urea may be retained in the kidney matrix of some of these animals to maintain a desired osmolarity. Now, there is a term called as osmolarity. What is osmolarity? Now, in earlier classes, right, in class 9, 10, we have already studied the principal function of kidney is actually your excretion. Correct? In younger days, we have studied already this kidney. The principal role of kidney is actually excretion. Kidney not only performs excretion, rather kidney performs one more function, which is called as osmoregulation. What is osmoregulation? Osmoregulation is basically nothing but maintaining of the salt and the water concentration in your blood. And what does the term osmolarity means? Osmolarity means it is the amount of solute. It is the amount of solute present in per liter of solution. Present in per liter of solution. In 1 liter of solution, the amount of solute actually determines its osmolarity. So kidney not only performs excretion, kidney also performs osmoregulation. Osmoregulation means maintenance of the water and the salt concentration in your blood. In your blood. So urea is partially released. Is urea totally released? No, urea is not completely released. Urea is partially released because some amount of urea is retained in our bloodstream to maintain the osmolarity of our blood plasma. Correct? Now, reptiles, birds, land snails, and insects, they excrete nitrogenous waste as uric acid in the form of a pellet or in the form of a paste with a minimum loss of water, and they are known as uricotelic animals. They are known as uricotelic animals. Correct? So you have to read NCERT line by line thoroughly. So the examples of ammonotelic organisms are bony fishes, aquatic amphibians, aquatic insects. The examples of uricotelic animals, reptiles, birds, land snail and insect. The example of ureotelic animals, mammals, terrestrial amphibians, and marine fishes. Correct? You have to remember the examples because in NEET, there is a column matching questions, right? So during column matching, it will help you. Now, we have to study about the different kind of excretory organs found in different organisms. Found in different organisms. Like what is written here in NCERT? If we survey the entire animal kingdom, it presents a variety of excretory structures. In the most of the invertebrates mean lacking the chordata, lacking the notochords, right? Invertebrates mean lacking the notochords. In most of the invertebrates, the excretory structures are simple tubular forms. So if the assertion came in most of the invertebrates, the excretory structures are in tubular nature, the statement will be true. Whereas in case of vertebrates, if we see in case of vertebrates, as vertebrates are more developed, so kingdom Animalia are divided into two special groups. One is invertebrates, or also called as non-chordates. Also called as non-chordates. They are basically lower group of organisms. They are lacking the notochord. Whereas second group of organisms are called as vertebrates. Now, what are vertebrates? No, we can't directly write it down as vertebrates. We can write it as chordates. Chordates must have notochord. So if the organisms lacks notochord within its body, they are known as non-chordates or invertebrates. And if an organism has the presence of notochord within its body is known as chordates. Now, in some of the chordates, the notochord in later stage of life gets replaced by vertebral column. Those organisms in which the notochord gets replaced by vertebral column are only called as vertebrates. So can I say that all vertebrates are chordates, but not all chordates are vertebrates? Because some of the chordates, notochord remain persistent throughout the life. It is not going to be replaced by vertebral column, right? It is not going to be replaced by vertebral column. So in most of the vertebrates means where the notochord is replaced by vertebral column, they have complex tubular organs because they are comparatively more developed organisms, and these are known as kidneys. So kidneys are found in case of vertebrates. Kidneys are found in case of vertebrates. Now there are also the different type of kidneys. There are also variety of kidney. Like the most primitive type of kidney is known as archaeonephric kidney. Write it down. Archaeonephric is the most primitive type of kidney. Is the most primitive. Note it down. Archaeonephric is the most primitive type of kidney. After archaeonephric, the second one is known as protonephric kidney. It is known as protonephric kidney. After protonephric, there is opisthonephric. Also called as mesonephric, also known as mesonephric kidney. Whereas the most developed one is known as metanephric kidney. That can filter the blood and remove the waste material from the blood. And metanephric kidney is seen in case of birds, in case of mammals, whereas in some reptiles also metanephric kidney is also found. Mammals, including humans. We have to include humans also. Including humans, and metanephric kidney is the most developed one that can only filter out the blood. It is the most developed one. So this is the evolution of kidney, we can say. Like in earlier chapter, like in body fluids and circulation, we have already discussed about the evolution of heart. Like in case of fishes, they have two-chambered heart. In case of amphibians and reptiles, they have three-chambered heart. Though crocodile has already tried to form a four-chambered heart, they have a four-chambered heart, but in between two ventricles, there is an opening called as foramen of Panism, through which the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood gets mixed with each other. Whereas in case of birds and in case of mammals, they are having four-chambered heart, and complete double circuit circulation is exhibited by them. So in case of, if we see the evolution of kidney, it is the most primitive one. After that, protonephric, then mesonephric, and finally the most developed one came, that is called as metanephric kidney. So what kind of kidney is present in us? We have actually metanephric kidneys. Kidneys are the developed structure, whereas in case of lower organisms like invertebrates, they have excretory structures or excretory organs in the form of simple tubular forms. Fine. Now, if we talk about platyhelminthes like flatworms, like planaria, we have to study in animal kingdom about the characteristic features of platyhelminthes also. Platyhelminthes have a dorsoventrally flattened body, right? Dorsoventrally, their body is flat in from the dorsal end as well as from the ventral end also. So there is no formation of cavity inside the body. Now, planaria, most of the platyhelminths are actually parasitic, but planaria is a free living flatworm. Planaria has very high regeneration capacity. They have very high regeneration capacity. If we cut the body of a planaria in multiple pieces, from each segment, one planaria develops. Correct? If we cut it into 5 pieces, so from one single planaria, after some point of time, we'll get 5 planarias. Correct? They have a high regeneration capacity. Regeneration means, like if this is the body of a planaria, let's say this is the body of a planaria. If we cut it into multiple pieces, like if we cut it into 5 segments, now each of these segments will develop into an individual planaria. So after some point of time, how many planaria can we get? We can get 5 planaria. This property is called as regeneration. So planaria has a high regeneration capacity. Correct. Now, what is the excretory organ in case of platyhelminthes? They have protonephridia, also called as phlegm cells. Not only platyhelminths, even in case of rotifers, in case of some annelids, and in case of cephalochordate belongs to chordata, but their notochord is not replaced by vertebral column. That's why they come under the category of protochordata. They come under the category of protochordata. Can we include them under vertebrata? No, because their vertebral column, their notochord is not replaced by vertebral column. Now, in case of cephalochordate comes under protochordata. One cephalochordate is amphioxus, right? The scientific name is branchiostoma. They have protonephridia or phlegm cells. So protonephridia or phlegm cells are excretory structures in case of platyhelminthes, in case of rotifers, in case of some annelids, and in case of amphioxus. Amphioxus is a cephalochordate. Right? Now, protonephridia are primarily concerned with ionic and the fluid volume regulation. Means they also performs osmoregulation. Right? Maintenance of water and the salt concentration in the body is known as osmoregulation. So protonephridia are also concerned with osmoregulation. Whereas if we see nephridia is excretory organ in case of arthworm and annelids. Right? Arthworm belongs to the phylum Annelida, ring-like structures. Metameric segmentation is present in them. Nephridia helps to remove the nitrogenous waste, and it also maintains a fluid and the ionic balance. Means it also performs osmoregulation. Whereas if you see in case of cockroaches, we can found Malpighian tubules. These are the tubular structures found in case of most of the developed insects, including cockroaches. Malpighian tubules, it also helps in the removal of nitrogenous waste as well as in osmoregulation. Whereas in case of crustaceans also belong to the phylum Arthropoda. They are a special class under phylum Arthropoda called as crustacea. Right? Crustacea, prawn, crabs, all of them come under the category or come under the class actually crustaceans. Now, in case of crustaceans, we'll find antennal glands and green glands that performs excretory function. So, how many kind of excretory organs are written in NCERT here? Protonephridia or phlegm cells, nephridia, third one is Malpighian tubule, and the fourth one is your antennal gland or green gland. And the fifth one is the kidney. Kidney is found in case of vertebrates. Right? We have also discussed about the evolution of kidney: archaeonephric, protonephric, mesonephric, metanephric. Archaeonephric is the most primitive one, whereas metanephric is the most developed one. Am I correct? Clear? Now, have you copied it? Done. Okay, fine. Done. Now, if we talk about the structure of human excretory system, in this chapter we are actually primarily focusing on humans. So if we talk about the structure of human excretory system, a system is always made up of organs. So human excretory system is also made up of excretory organs, and these excretory organs are grouped into two categories: human excretory system. Human excretory system. It is made up of excretory organs, and the excretory organs are categorized into two categories. One is known as primary excretory organ, another one is called as secondary excretory organ. One is primary excretory organ, another one is secondary excretory organ. So primary excretory organ and secondary excretory organ. Okay, the primary excretory organ, it includes a pair of kidneys. How many kidneys do we have? Two. A pair of kidneys. From kidneys, tube-like structure arises called as ureters. How many ureters? Two ureters. both the ureters merges into a sac-like structure called as urinary bladder, and that stores temporary urine, and urinary bladders opens up through an opening called as urethra. Right? Now, secondary excretory organ, it includes skin, because in skin we have sweat glands, we have sebaceous gland. Sweat glands or sudoriferous gland excrete sweat. Sweat glands or sudoriferous glands. Sudoriferous glands. And the second one is called as sebaceous glands, or also called as oil glands. Sebaceous glands, also called as oil glands, that releases sebum. That releases sebum, also called as oil. Whereas sudoriferous glands secretes sweat. Sweat. And the second one is lungs. Through lungs, CO2 is excreted out via exhalation. We have already studied in the breathing and exchange of gases chapter. And the third one is, apart from skin and lungs, there are liver. There is liver. We have to remember, liver is the largest gland in our body. Liver is the largest gland in our body. So what are the role of secondary excretory organ? You have to study it from NCERT. You have to study it from NCERT. It is given in NCERT in detail. What are the role of secondary excretory organ? Now, if we see in NCERT, the role of secondary excretory organs are given. Now, these are basically the role of other organs in excretion. Role of other organs in excretion. Right? Now, what is written? Other than kidneys, because kidneys are the primary excretory organs. Lungs, liver, as well as skin also help in the elimination of excretory waste. Like our lungs, they remove a large amount of carbon dioxide. Not only carbon dioxide, along with the carbon dioxide, water vapor is also released through our exhalation. What is the rate of CO2 released through our lungs? Approximately 200 ml per minute. Approximately 200 ml per minute. Now, liver, being the largest gland in our body, it secretes bile containing substances. What is the primary function of liver? Bile juice secretion. Right? It contains bile pigments, bilirubin, biliverdin. Excessive bilirubin concentration leads to jaundice, cholesterol, degraded steroid hormones, vitamins, and drugs. These are excreted out by liver. Most of these substances ultimately pass out along with the digestive weight. They are not released through urine. They are basically released with the fecal matter, feces. Now, the sweat and the sebaceous glands in the skin can eliminate certain substances through their secretion. Like sweat that is produced by the sweat gland is a watery fluid that contains sodium chloride, a very little amount of urea, as well as lactic acid. What is the primary function of sweat? Sweat actually provides a cooling effect on our body. But along with the cooling effect, apart from giving a cooling effect, it also helps us in releasing waste material from our body. Correct? Sebaceous glands, known as oil glands, they releases sterols, hydrocarbons, and waxes through the sebum. What is the primary function of sebum? Sebum gives us a oily secretion over our skin that supples our skin. Basically, during the summer season, the release of the sebum actually increased, and during the winter season, the secretion of sebum gets decreased. So this secretion provides a protective oily covering for the skin also, but along with it, some amount of waste materials also gets released. So what is the role of lungs? Lungs releases CO2 as well as along with CO2 water vapor. What is the role of liver? Liver, through liver, bilirubin, biliverdin, cholesterol, degraded steroid hormones, vitamins, drugs, they are also released through the digestive waste. Through sweat, there is release of urea, there is release of sodium chloride, there is release of lactic acid. And through sebaceous gland, there is release of sterols, hydrocarbons, and waxes. Got it? Now, we are going to talk about the structure of kidney. We are actually focusing on the structure of kidney. So, in case of humans, the excretory system comprises of a pair of kidney, one pair of ureters, one urinary bladder, and a urethra. We are talking about kidneys. Now, kidneys are bean-shaped structures, reddish brown in color. Correct. It is situated on the posterior side of the body, right? Situated on the dorsal side, we can say. It is situated on the dorsal side of the body in between T12 to L3. T12 means in between 12th thoracic vertebra to 3rd lumbar vertebra. Correct? How many type of vertebra do we have? In the neck region, we have cervical vertebra. Number of cervical vertebra is 7. In the chest region, we have thoracic vertebra. How many thoracic vertebra do we have? 12. In the abdominal region, we have lumbar. How many lumbar vertebra do we have? 5. And in the lower abdominal region, we have sacral vertebra. How many sacral vertebra do we have? We have actually 5 sacral vertebra, but all the 5 gets fused to form one single piece. And in the tail region, we have coccygeal, or also called as caudal vertebra. We have 4 actually caudal vertebra, but all the 4 fused to form one single piece. So the kidney is actually extended between T12. T12 means from the last thoracic vertebra to the 3rd lumbar vertebra. Look, here it is also written. Kidneys are reddish brown, bean-shaped structure situated between the levels of last thoracic vertebra and 3rd lumbar vertebra. So as kidneys are present on the dorsal side of our body, so they are actually covered by only the ventral side peritoneum. What is ventral side peritoneum? Look, if we take a structure, if we take a cross section, let's say this is the ventral side of our body, this is the dorsal side. Where kidney is actually located? Kidney is actually attached with the dorsal wall. It is also written close to the dorsal inner wall of the abdominal cavity. Dorsal inner wall of the abdominal cavity. So they are actually covered by the peritoneum, or the covering from only from which side? Only from ventral side. No? Can they get covered with the peritoneum of the dorsal side? Because they are actually attached with the dorsal wall. As they are attached with the dorsal wall, they can only be covered by the peritoneum of the ventral side. Correct? So that kind of position is known as retroperitoneal position. Retroperitoneal in position. What do you mean by retroperitoneal position? Retroperitoneal word stands for, as kidney are attached with the dorsal wall of our body, they can be covered with the peritoneum from the ventral side only. Such kind of position is known as retroperitoneal position. Now, what is the measurement of kidney? It is made, the approx measurement is about 10 to 12 centimeter in length, 5 to 7 centimeter in width, 2 to 3 centimeter in thickness, and the average weight is of 120 to 170 gram. Correct? 120 to 170 gram. In case of females, the weight is slightly lower, and in case of males, the weight is slightly heavier. In case of female, the weight is about females. In case of females, the weight is about between 120 to 140 gram. In case of males, the weight actually goes up to 170 gram. Right? In case of males, the weight can go up to 170 gram. But NCERT says the average weight lies between 120 to 170, irrespective of male and female. Now, if we look the structure of, this is an external overview of human urinary system or the human excretory system. Look, what do we see? We see this is the kidney. The kidney which is present on the right side is known as the right kidney. So this is going to be our right kidney. This is going to be our right kidney, and this is going to be our left kidney. Correct? This is going to be our left kidney. Now, superior to the kidney, superior means above. Above the kidney, there are a pair of endocrine glands called as adrenal gland. Ad means adjacent. Ad word stands for adjacent. Renal word stands for kidney. So adrenal gland means adjacent to kidney. As they are present above the kidney, superior to the kidney, that's why they are also called as suprarenal gland. They are endocrine glands secreting some important. Right? We'll study about this in chemical control and coordination chapter. They are called as suprarenal glands because they are present above the kidney. Now, the inner side of the kidney, if we see the inner side of the kidney, as it is a bean-shaped structure, the inner side of the kidney is concave. It is the concave end. This side is actually the concave end. Right? In the concave end, there is a notch. We can say there is a notch. There is a notch. This is a notch on the inner side of the kidney. This notch is actually called as hilum. What is it? What it is called? It is known as hilum. Now, through hilum, look carefully. Through hilum, a blood vessel enters. A blood vessel enters called as renal artery. Called as renal artery. So, renal artery enters into kidney or leaves the kidney. It is entering into the kidney. Artery always enters into organs. So renal artery must be a branch of aorta, and aorta is originating from heart. Aorta is originating from heart. So renal artery, as it is an artery, it should carry oxygenated blood. So renal artery brings oxygenated but urea-rich blood to our kidney. It goes inside the kidney. What is the function of kidney? Kidney filters that blood, and from that blood, urea is actually removed. And the waste product, along with water, which is called as urine, it actually comes out through the ureter. So we can say ureter is also coming out from the kidney. Ureter is actually coming out from the kidney. Correct? It is coming out from the kidney. From where it is actually coming out? From the hilum. And what happened to the blood? The blood which is filtered. The filtered blood finally comes out of the kidney through another blood vessel called as renal vein. So renal vein comes out of the kidney. From where it is coming out of the kidney, it is also coming out from the hilum. So can I say hilum is a notch that is present on the inner side of the kidney, on the concave end of the kidney, through which the renal artery enters, through which the renal vein leaves, through which the ureter also leaves. Ureter is actually living with the urine within it, whereas the renal vein is actually living with deoxygenated. But is that blood containing urea? No. We can't say there is complete absence of urea. There is very little amount of urea is present because some amount of urea is required in maintaining the osmolarity of our blood. So, what kind of blood is present in the renal vein? Renal vein, as it is a vein, so of course it is carrying deoxygenated blood, but containing very less amount of urea. Deoxygenated blood containing very less amount of urea. Deoxygenated blood with very less amount of urea. We can't say that there is complete absence of urea basically. Now, this renal vein should merge into inferior vena cava, and inferior vena cava will finally open up into heart again. So the blood is also coming from the heart and it is returned back to the heart again. Correct? It is coming from the heart through aorta, and the branch of aorta is known as renal artery that entering into the kidney. Kidney filters it, removes the blood through renal vein. Renal one finally opens into inferior vena cava, and inferior vena cava return the blood into heart again. Okay, clear? Noted? Now, we'll talk about the structure of ureter first. We'll talk about the structure of ureter first. Okay, then I will go with the section of a kidney. First of all, let me complete with the structure of ureter, urinary bladder, urethra, and then I will move into the internal structure of kidneys. Right. Noted down the structure of ureters. Ureters. Now, ureters are two fine tubes. They are coming out of the kidney through hilum, carrying the urine, and finally opening inside the urinary bladder. Fine. Now, in the wall of ureter, the wall of ureter is actually trilayered. How many layers are there? Three. How many layers are there? Three. Tri-layered it is. The outermost layer is known as tunica adventitia. The outermost layer is known as tunica adventitia, whereas the middle layer, it is a muscular layer. The middle layer is a muscular layer, and there are muscles, smooth muscles, of course. They are arranged in two layers. One is known as longitudinal muscle. One is known as longitudinal muscle. Inner to the longitudinal muscle, there is circular muscle. So the muscular layer is further divided into two. The outermost one is a longitudinal. Inner to the longitudinal, there is circular. And the innermost layer is an epithelium, which is called as transitional epithelium. Transitional epithelium is a type of epithelium. It is a type of epithelium that has the capacity to. What do you mean by the transitional epithelium? That has an ability to stretch. Stretchable epithelium. This is actually a stretchable epithelium. And transitional epithelium comprises of a major part of our urinary system. That's why transitional epithelium is also called as urothelium. Urothelium, as it comprising of a large portion of our urinary system. Now, where do this ureter open actually? These two ureters opening actually inside the urinary bladder. Now, look here. If we draw a urinary bladder here, let's suppose this is an urinary bladder. Let's suppose there is an urinary bladder, and this urinary bladder, within this urinary bladder, two ureter opens, and this is finally the urethra. This is finally the urethra, and it has an opening here also. It is an internal opening. This is an external opening. Now, urine is actually coming out from the kidney through this ureter, and it comes inside this urinary bladder. So after the urine comes into the urinary bladder, the pressure of the urine is high in urinary bladder. Now, urine tends to backflow from this urinary bladder to ureter again. Right? But we have to prevent this backflow of the urine inside the inside the ureter. So what do we actually do? Do ureters are provided with valves? Do ureters are provided with valves? Do ureters are provided with valves? Can we say ureters are provided with valves? No, there are no valves inside this ureter. So how do we actually prevent the backflow? Look, we have already discussed in the structure of human heart. If there is an oblique entry of any kind of blood vessel, if there is any kind of curvature in the pathway of a liquid, the liquid has to work more. Correct? So urine is also fluid. As the ureters have an oblique entry, so the urine actually, it cannot backflow. Correct? It cannot backflow again into the ureter. Fine, because the entry of the ureter is not straight, rather it is oblique. Look here, the ureters have an oblique entry here. It is not straight, it is an oblique entry. Now, inside the ureter, inside the urinary bladder, There are two opening of ureter and there is an internal opening. They are forming a triangular structure, and this triangular structure is known as trigone. This is known as trigone of urinary bladder. This is known as the trigone of urinary bladder. This is the trigone of urinary bladder, we can say. Correct? Now, if we draw the structure of urinary bladder, let's say this is the urinary bladder actually. This urinary bladder, we are coming inside into urinary bladder now. Urinary bladder has three parts. This is the top part of the urinary bladder called as the apex part of the urinary bladder. Tip of the urinary bladder is called as the apex. This part of the urinary bladder is known as the body part of the urinary bladder, or also called as the fundus part of the urinary bladder. This is known as the body or the fundus part of the urinary bladder. And this much portion is known as the neck. This is called as the neck of the urinary bladder. Also, you can call it as urethra. Fine. Urethra, neck of the urinary bladder. Now, the body or the fundus of urinary bladder, it is also made up of three layers. Urinary bladder, the wall of urinary bladder is also made up of how many layers? It is also made up of three layers. The outermost layer is known as tunica adventitia. The outermost layer is known as tunica adventitia. There is a middle layer. The middle layer is known as muscular layer, and the muscle is arranged in three layers. Outermost is longitudinal. Middle one is the circular. Inner to the circular, there is another layer of longitudinal muscle fiber. So how it is different from the middle layer of the ureter? In the ureter, the middle layer comprising of a muscle, and the muscles are arranged in only two layers, outer longitudinal, inner circular. But here, it is divided into three layers, outer longitudinal, middle circular, inner again longitudinal. And the innermost layer is known as stretchable epithelium, called as transitional epithelium, Okay. Now, copied. Now, this urinary bladder can store up to 750 ml of urine at a time. It can store up to 750 ml of urine at a time. But whenever the concentration of urine gets exceeded by 500 ml, there are presence of certain stretch receptor in the wall of urinary bladder. This urinary bladder starts stretching out, and as soon as it starts stretching out, the stretch receptors gets activated. From the stretch receptors, the neurons comes out. What kind of neurons these are? These are actually sensory neurons, conveying the sense from an receptor towards the central nervous system. This is a sensory neuron, also called as an afferent neuron. It is converting. We can say it is actually transferring the stimulus. It is actually carrying the stimulus from a receptor towards the central nervous system. That means towards the brain. Right? From the central nervous system, another kind of neuron arises called as motor neuron, that carrying the stimulus, that is carrying the impulse, we can say, towards the urinary bladder. Right? And as a result of that, urinary bladder starts contracting. And as soon as urinary bladder starts contracting, there are two distinct sphincter muscles in the urethral region. How many sphincter muscles are there? Two. One is located internally, another one is located externally. The internal sphincter, this is known as the internal sphincter. The internal sphincter, by nature, it is involuntary. Internal sphincter, by nature, it is involuntary. Whereas the outermost one is known as the external sphincter. The external sphincter, by nature, it is voluntary. That means the internal sphincter is not under your control, whereas the external sphincter is definitely under your control. So what is actually happened here? The urinary bladder, I have said earlier, it can store 750 ml of urine at a time. But whenever the concentration of urine gets exceeded by 500 ml, the stretch receptor present in the wall of urinary bladder, it actually gets activated. How it gets activated? Because the urinary bladder starts stretching out. As soon as it starts stretching out, the stretch receptor gets activated. From the stretch receptors, neurons arises. What kind of neuron these are? Sensory neuron. These neurons are carrying the impulse towards the central nervous system. From central nervous system, another signal came through the motor neuron or the efferent neuron, that actually coming into the wall of the urinary bladder, that is actually commanding the urinary bladder to contract. As soon as the urinary bladder starts contracting, there is simultaneous opening of both internal as well as the external sphincter. Right? There is simultaneous opening. Remember, both the sphincters should be simultaneously opened. Internal sphincter remained open always because it is involuntary. As soon as the stimulus comes, the internal sphincter actually opens out. There is no regulation of us upon this internal sphincter because it is by nature involuntary. Whereas external sphincter is voluntary. It is under our will. Right? If there is a simultaneous opening of internal as well as external sphincter, the urine will finally come out from our body. And that process is known as micturition. This process is known as micturition. This is called as a micturition. So this micturition, definitely, it is a reflex phenomenon. Definitely, it is a reflex phenomenon. Can I say that? Reflex phenomenon. So we can say ki the micturition, the frequency of micturition, it is actually under nervous regulation. It is actually under neural regulation. So there are two kind of autonomic nervous system we have actually already studied. What are the two parts of autonomic nervous system that regulates all the involuntary action? One is parasympathetic, and another one is known as sympathetic. One is parasympathetic, another one is known as sympathetic. We have already studied parasympathetic works under normal physiological condition, whereas sympathetic works under stressful condition. So under the stimulus from parasympathetic nervous system, the micturition frequency should get increased or decreased. It works under normal physiological conditions. In normal physiological condition, normal urination frequency is there. So micturition frequency should be increased. When there is a stressful condition, think carefully. When there is a stressful condition, sympathetic nervous system is activated. Under stressful condition, can our body waste its energy by excreting urine at that point of time? Of course not. So under the stimulus from sympathetic nervous system, the micturition frequency gets decreased. Right? Because this is sympathetic nervous system, it is activated only when there is an emergency. And if there is any kind of external emergency, any kind of stressful situations, our body is not a fool. Right? It will not lose its energy by excreting urine at that point of time. So of course the frequency will decrease. The frequency will decrease. So under the influence of micturition, under the influence of parasympathetic nervous system, the micturition frequency increases. Under the influence from sympathetic nervous system, the micturition frequency decreases. Am I clear? Good. So what is micturition? It is the voiding of urine. It is the voiding of urine, release of urine. So during the release of urine, both the internal and the external sphincter should be simultaneously opened. So if internal is opened, external is closed, can urine be excreted? External is closed. No, of course not. If internal is opened, external is closed, it cannot be excreted. Right? Now, as our age increases, the stretch receptors present on the wall of the urinary bladder, it starts responding very less. They start becoming non-functional. Right? They start becoming non-functional. They actually couldn't respond properly with the contraction of with the stretch of the urinary bladder. So there will be no control over the urination. So as our age increases, there is no control of us over our urination or over our micturition. So this is an emergency. This is an medical condition called as incontinence. Incontinence. Incontinence means there is no control over micturition because the stretch receptor starts becoming non-functional. They starts becoming responding very less with respect to the stretchability of the urinary bladder. Fine. Now let's come to urethra. Let's come to urethra. So urethra, it is an opening through which urine is excreted out from our body. Can I say this opening is the urethral opening, or also known as urethral meatus? This is known as urethral opening, or also you can call it as urethral meatus. Now urethra, it is quite longer in males. It's quite longer in males. In males, it is approximately 20 centimeter long. Right? In males, the urethra is approximately 20 centimeter long. But in case of male, we already studied in class 12 in human reproduction chapter. In case of males, there is a common opening that carries both urine as well as semen. That's why this is called as an urinogenital duct. Why do we call it as a urinogenital duct? Because it is carrying both urine as well as sperms. Whereas in case of females, the urethra is quite shorter in length. It is approximately 4 centimeter long. It is approximately 4 centimeter in length. It is quite shorter. But in case of females, the urethral opening and the vaginal opening both are different. The urethral opening and the vaginal opening both are different. Both are different. But in case of females, as urethra is very shorter in length, so any kind of pathogen, they can go through this urethra very easily and can reach up to the pelvic region, reach up to the lower abdominal region. So you can say, as females, the urethra is quite shorter in length. So females are more prone to any kind of UTI. UTI means urinary tract infections. Right? The frequency of UTI is more in case of females as compared to males. Urinary tract infections. And these urinary tract infections, somehow it can lead to PIDs also. What are PIDs? PID means pelvic inflammatory diseases. There can be inflammation in the lower abdominal region, pelvic region also. Got it? Clear? In 2 minutes. Now, what do NCERT say about micturition? Let's talk about micturition first. Now, what is micturition? NCERT says urine formed by the nephrons. What are nephrons? Nephrons are the filtration unit that are present inside the kidney. Right? Nephrons are the structural and the functional unit of kidney. So urine formed by the nephron, it is ultimately carried to the urinary bladder by ureter, where it is stored till a voluntary signal is given by the central nervous system. What kind of signal it is? Voluntary signal. How does this signal actually initiate? This signal is basically initiated by the stretching of the urinary bladder. I have said that already, as it gets filled with urine. In response to this, the stretch receptors on the wall of the urinary bladder, it sends signal to the CNS through sensory neuron. The CNS passes on motor messages it passes on the motor messages to initiate the contraction of the smooth muscle of the urinary bladder and the simultaneous relaxation of the urethral sphincters that causes the release of the urine. This process of release of urine is known as micturition, and these neural mechanisms causing it called as the micturition reflex. I have said that this is definitely a reflex phenomena. Okay, clear? You have to study about micturition up to this much. This is the characteristic feature of urine actually. We'll study after the formation of urine about the characteristic features. Now, if we take a longitudinal section of human kidney, what do we see? This is basically the longitudinal section of human kidney, right? The outermost layer of the kidney, if we cut the kidney in a longitudinal section, the kidney comes like this. This is the longitudinal appearance inside the kidney. Now, this is the outermost layer of the kidney, and this layer is known as the renal capsule. Outer to the renal capsule, basically, if we see this is the renal capsule, this is the outermost layer, right? In NCERT, it is said that there is a single layer surrounding the kidney, but surrounding this, there is a layer of fat also. Surrounding this, there is a layer of fat also. There is a layer of a fat also surrounding the kidney, and that fat is known as renal fat. That is known as renal fat. Okay. Now, outer to this renal fat, there is another layer which is called as renal fascia. So actually kidney is protected by how many layers? 3. Okay, renal capsule. Outer to the renal capsule, there is known as renal fat. Is a fatty cushion. This is renal fat, and outer to the renal fat, there is another layer which is known as renal fascia. It is known as renal fascia. This is renal fascia. Am I clear? Now, This is renal fascia. Now, if we take a section of a kidney, kidney is clearly distinguished into two distinct parts. The outer part of the kidney is known as renal cortex. The outer part of the kidney is known as renal cortex. So cortex represents the outer part of the kidney, whereas the inner part of the kidney is known as, this is the inner part of the kidney. This inner part of the kidney is known as renal medulla. So medulla represents which part of the kidney? Medulla represents the inner part of kidney. If we see in the medullary region, there are certain kind of pyramid-like structures. Those pyramids are actually inverted. Look carefully, these pyramids are inverted. The upper end is the broader end. This is the narrower end. Okay, so the broader end is projected towards the which part? Broader end is projected towards the cortex, and the narrow end is projected towards the medulla. And the narrow end is also known as renal papilla. The narrow end of the renal pyramid or the medullary pyramid. Can I call this medullary pyramid as renal pyramid also? We can call it as renal pyramid also. So this medullary pyramid or renal pyramid, these are actually inverted pyramid, right? The broader end is projected towards the cortex, whereas the narrower end, which is known as renal papilla, they are projected towards the medulla region. Now, from the renal papilla region, there are very fine tube coming out. There are very fine tubes coming out. These regions, these are the fine tubes that these are coming out, and these fine tubes are actually called as minor calyces. They are called as minor calyces or minor calyx. Many of the minor calyx merges here. Many of the minor calyx merges here. And can we say minor calyxes merges to form major calyxes? Minor calyx merges to form major calyx. Major calyx opens into this broad region. Look, this major calyx opens up into this broad region. This broad region is known as renal pelvis. Minor calyces merges to form major calyxes. Major calyx opens into this broad region, and this broad region is known as renal pelvis. Right? This renal pelvis finally comes out into the ureter. Finally comes out into the ureter. As the renal pelvis comes down, it eventually starts getting narrower, and it is known as ureter. Right? So the flow of urine should be from medullary pyramid to minor calyx to major calyx to renal pelvis to ureter, from ureter to urinary bladder to urethra, from urethra it comes outside. This should be the flow of urine. We have to start from medullary pyramid, right? Why we have to start from medullary pyramid? I will discuss it later. We have to start always from medullary pyramid. Now, sometimes what happened? Sometimes the cortex region starts getting innervated in between this medullary pyramid. It starts getting innervated in between this medullary pyramid, and these regions are called as renal columns of Bertini. Renal columns of Bertini. What is renal columns of Bertini? Sometimes the cortex region gets innervated in between the medullary pyramid, and this is known as renal columns of Bertini. Clear? Now, inside the kidney, there are, what is the function of kidney? Filtration of blood. So there must be some filtration unit inside the kidney, right? The filtration units are known as nephrons. So what are nephrons? Nephrons, can we say these are the structural and the functional unit of kidney? Each kidney contains 1 million nephron. So how many nephron do we have? 2 million in both the kidneys. So in terms of a number of a nephron, we are actually millionaire. 1 million in each kidney, so 2 millions in both the kidneys. Now, where are actually nephrons located? Nephrons are actually located here in this region. They are located like this. They are located like this. So ultimately, the filtration will finally comes into where? Medullary pyramid. That's why we have started the flow of urine from medullary pyramid. So if we see the structure of a nephron, this is actually nephron. This is actually a nephron. Now this nephron comprising of two major parts. This region, it is a cup-shaped structure. And this cup-shaped structure is known as Bowman's capsule. Okay. Now, if we draw a Bowman's capsule like this, let's say this is the Bowman's capsule here. This is the Bowman's capsule. From here, there is a network of capillary. This network of capillary is known as glomerulus. Right? Glomerulus is about your 50 sets of capillaries. This is about 50 sets of capillaries. How many capillaries are there? There are about 50 sets of capillaries. Now this glomerular capillary, the principal function of glomerular capillary is the filtration of blood. The blood enters through afferent arteriole and the filtered blood comes out through efferent arteriole. If we see, there is a variation in the diameter of both efferent as well as efferent. Efferent is comparatively more wider here, whereas efferent is comparatively more narrower here. Correct? Efferent is much more wider, efferent is much more narrower. What is indicating? It is indicating that more blood is coming in and less blood is coming out. There is generation of an effective pressure. If more blood is coming in and less blood is coming out, there must be a generation of a effective pressure. And with the help of that pressure, the blood gets filtered and the urine finally comes up into your Bowman's capsule region. That is known as glomerular filtration pressure. So can I say that glomerular filtration pressure is developed due to the difference in the diameter of efferent as well as efferent? Efferent is much more wider, efferent is much more narrower. So more blood is coming in, less blood is coming out. Of course, eventually there will be development of a pressure that is called as glomerular filtration pressure that helps the blood to get filtered out. Right? Fine. So efferent arteriole must be a branch of which artery? It must be a branch of renal artery, no? Because renal artery is the only one that enters into the kidney. And inside the kidney, if the renal artery enters, can one renal artery supply? Can renal artery sufficient to supply the supply? Can one renal artery is sufficient to in supplying the blood to 1 million nephron? Is it sufficient? Of course not. Now, one renal artery is entering into kidney. So one renal artery is insufficient in supplying the blood of 1 million nephron. So it must be branched out. So the branches of renal artery is known as efferent arteriole. What kind of blood it is? What kind of blood is there inside the efferent arteriole? Oxygenated but urea rich blood. The blood is getting filtered here and the purified blood, that means deoxygenated but without urea. But without urea or very less amount of urea. It is coming out of the glomerulus through efferent arteriole. So this efferent arteriole should open into which blood vessel? Renal vein. And renal vein will finally comes up into inferior vena cava. Inferior vena cava will finally open into heart. Right? So this should be the blood flow. Now look. So this glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, togetherly known as Malpighian corpuscle. Togetherly known as Malpighian corpuscle. What is Malpighian corpuscle? The glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, they are togetherly known as Malpighian corpuscle. Fine. Now, inside the nephron, these layers are helping the blood to get filtered out. So through these layers, the blood is actually filtered out. So can I say this membrane is known as a filtration membrane? Can I say this membrane is a filtration membrane? How many layers are there in the filtration membrane? It is also tri-layered. We'll discuss the structure of filtration membrane later. Now, look carefully here. From the Bowman's capsule, the urine comes into a much convoluted structure. This is known as proximal convoluted tubule. Why does the word proximal? Proximal means closure. As it is close to the Bowman capsule, that's why it is known as proximal convoluted tubule. From the PCT region, it enters into this loop of Henle. That is a U-shaped structure. Now, this loop of Henle has two distinct limbs. One is moving downward, another one is moving running upward. That one which is moving or running downward is known as descending limb of loop of Henle. And that one which is running upward is known as ascending limb of loop of Henle. The descending limb of loop of Henle has initial part has much more thicker region. Right? This region is much more thicker. So this is the thick part of descending limb of loop of Henle. This is the thin part of descending limb of loop of Henle. Now it will finally enter into thin part of ascending limb of loop of Henle. That will further enter into thick part of ascending limb of Henle. So the descending limb has the initial portion thicker, lower portion thinner, whereas the ascending limb has the initial portion thinner, the later portion is thicker. Right? From the thick part of the ascending limb of loop of Henle, the urine will enter into distal convoluted tubule. It is known as distal. Distal means far away. Why it is convoluted? It is convoluted. That's why convoluted terms here. Distal means it is away from the Bowman. It is away from the Bowman's capsule. That's why it is distal. This distal convoluted tubule will finally opens up into your collecting duct. Right? But is collecting duct a part of a single nephron? No. Look, this collecting duct is accepting a DCT from here. It is accepting another DCT from here also. So collecting duct, can we say, it is not a part of single uriniferous tubule. It is not a part of single uriniferous tubule. Single uriniferous tubule. Collecting duct receives 8 to 20 DCTs approx. How many? 8 to 20 DCTs approx. Collecting duct will finally opens into duct of Bellini. Duct of Bellini. And duct of Bellini, where it is actually opened? It is actually opened into your. Should I remove it? Duct of Bellini will finally opens into this region where this medullary pyramid. Medullary pyramid will finally opens into minor calyx, then major calyx, renal pelvis. So what should be the flow of actually urine? Can I say the flow of urine should be from glomerulus, then Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, thick part of the descending limb of loop of Henle, thin part of the descending limb of loop of Henle, then thin part of the ascending limb of loop of Henle, then thick part of the ascending limb of loop of Henle, then DCT, then collecting duct, then duct of Bellini. Duct of Bellini will open into your where? Duct of Bellini will open into your medullary pyramid. That will finally open into minor calyx. From minor calyx, it will go into major calyx. Major calyx, it will go into renal pelvis. From renal pelvis, it will enter into ureter. From ureter, it will enter into urinary bladder. Urinary bladder to urethra. And through urethra, it finally comes out. Now look, this is the flow of urine inside the kidney, correct? Now, if we see the flow of blood, finally, the pumping organ of blood is heart. From heart, there is origin of aorta. One branch of the aorta is your renal artery. Renal artery comes inside the kidney through the hilum. This renal artery gets branched into efferent arteriole. Efferent arteriole forms glomerulus. From the another end of the glomerulus, efferent arteriole comes out. But this efferent arteriole forms a network of capillary around the renal tubule. It forming a network of capillary surrounding the renal tubule. And this is known as peritubular capillary. This is known as peritubular capillary. Now look carefully. The part of peritubular capillary which is surrounding which is surrounding the U part of the loop of Henle is known as vasa recta. It is known as vasa recta. It's a part of peritubular capillary that is surrounding the U part of the loop of Henle. So this peritubular capillary will finally open into renal vein. Renal vein will finally open into inferior vena cava. That will finally opens up into your heart again. So what should be the flow of blood through blood through kidney? Can I say the heart pumps the blood? From the heart, blood enters into aorta. From aorta, it enters into renal artery. Renal artery opens into efferent arteriole. Efferent arteriole enters into glomerulus. Glomerulus enters into efferent arteriole. From efferent arteriole, there is origin of peritubular capillary. Peritubular capillary marches to form renal vein. Renal vein opens into inferior vena cava, and inferior vena cava is back to the heart again. So, how many sets of capillaries are formed inside the kidney? There are formation of two sets of capillary. One is your glomerulus. Second set of capillary is your peritubular capillary. But where does the pressure is high? Of course, in the glomerulus, because through glomerulus, the filtration of the blood. Through peritubular capillary, there is no filtration of blood. So relatively, the pressure inside the glomerulus is higher as compared to that of your peritubular capillary. Okay, in the next class, we are going to discuss about the more detailing about nephrons. Okay, we'll discuss about the types of nephron, how does urine formation takes place inside the nephron. All of these topics will be discussed in the Monday class. Monday I will take an extra class. Okay.